Hello, Sam.
Hello. Hello. We are
Um,
just saving bandwidth. Oh, here's Peter. Saving bandwidth a bit. I'm also uploading Friday's talk directly to Sonics because for some reason their YouTube link thing doesn't work.
oh, okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Oh, just out of curiosity, Mark, when
Yeah.
we're training dot operators, can we put a new line before the dot so that they line up vertically instead of getting too long and wrapped around?
The answer is I don't know until somebody tries it. Given the nature of things, I expect it to either work or not.
Good answer.
I doubt. I suspect it might not because I doubt Mark would have designed it, with that in mind, because most people aren't coming to these things from a sort of coding background, and I know where you're coming from exactly, but it's also why I said I put tons of tabs in my code prototypes just so I can step things across the page.
Maybe wrapping them in parentheses. Maybe parentheses should be able to cross line barriers without a problem. So
I'm having fun this afternoon. Here a simple thing. I just want. I'm trying to export for the mural data here, which I've done everything. I've even done a whole lot of links, but I can't export them from an alias because the alias can't call each links operator. Or can it even do it inside a function, which theoretically it should do because the function executes in the locus of where we are. Oh, right, here, folks. Get back on the main topic.
maybe pass the ID of the original to the function, then have the function.
I tried that.
Hi everyone. So I am up.
You really have the programmer gene, Mark. You don't realize it, but you do have the programmer gene.
So I'm up in a place called Enfield, north of London, to see a friend who is not doing brilliantly well right now. So my timing of today is a bit off, so I may have to leave after the first hour, but at least we will go through the Google/Linnaean Society update. Yeah, I guess we should wait a little bit till Brandel gets here. Anybody have anything else before we go through that?
Just a quick one. I think Fabian and Adam would have seen it now, but I finally got some of the mural JSON stuff done, which I post, and I popped a link to it in the Twitter. Hi, Raphael. Yeah, and it's missing the links, and I'll sort that out and add it to it. I mean, whether it's actually any use or not, I don't really know, but I thought it might help with some experimentation.
Isn't that what Adam was also taking his image at 1057? Is that combined what you guys are doing in the Twitter stream 1057?
I assume that's something. Well, I'll get Adam to answer. I assume it's something he extracted. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's only the PDF. That's very messy things. It's almost character by character placed on as PDF. It has no structure or no meaning to it. So what Mark is doing is cleaning that data up, but we need to get the coordinates in there so we can match. For example, if you click on that mural, you get Mark's data in a clean form extracted, and maybe you can do something with it. You can search it for dates and geography or whatever you like that we add to it.
I mean, when I started this out, the one bit I hadn't thought to check first was whether there was actually any meaningful way to attach the data I'd extracted to the position in the PDF. Another one of those things you learn.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to do some kind of image map, right?
Yeah, and I think what I take away from this also is, as we think about moving things in and out of, it's just another case where if I was doing this today, I was doing it in Illustrator as it originally was. So I just make sure that I stuck a UID bit of info in all the vector information that's in that will become the PDF. So you've got the link in there. And if the link's in there, then I'm absolutely sure with the right type of screwdriver, we can jam it out and then reattach it to the external stuff. But not all things are easy.
This is true. So let's Rafael is looking for headphones, and Brandel is maybe going to join us, but we'll give it another minute or two. We're having some problems with getting the transcripts done. The YouTube link doesn't work, so the last meetings I'm now trying to upload manually to Sonics. And also on the journal front, because from author now we can export to WordPress and HTML in my test version. So the journal articles are now in HTML, highly unreadable, but at least they're there so they can be extracted if we need the text in the future.
When you say unreadable, do you mean in terms of the markup or?
Yeah, in terms of the presentation, it's one huge long scroll with sometimes the headings don't have any space above them, and the visual presentation is very, very bad.
Well, we can fix that with some CSS. I mean, effectively, as long as you're getting a clean DOM, it's sort of HTML outline, CSS solves all.
Yeah, we can, but it's also been discussed. There isn't any point really for anyone to read the journal at this point. Maybe what we should do is take the resources section and have that on the website, because that's more immediately useful and so on. But okay,
that's true.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
No. Also, you and me, Mark, we will probably try to release journal 3 tomorrow.
Fro, do you think maybe we could have author implement one of the best features that Tinderbox has for being able to do crazy integrations and stuff is a command called HTML export command. And it's just an attribute in the file that contains the location of a script that gets run on any output before the output's saved on disk. So basically, whenever you're exporting, it'd save everything to temp file, run the temp file through that script, and take the output of that script and write that in the final file. And that would let us reach in and start doing interesting things with author output without having to change anything internally in author. It's basically how the Tinderbox community prototypes things using that hook.
I think it's quite unlikely, to be honest, because that's quite specialist, but it's an interesting approach. All right, okay, we waited 8 minutes, so let's just get into the meeting this morning with Google. I was meeting with one guy from Google. He's actually based in London, and clearly they're all excited about the idea. They also like the fact that it's bounded. It's not everything. Start with the cars and or something else. He was asking me, what does VR really contribute? He was concerned that we were only doing VR. And I said, well, the metadata is really, really key. So it should be possible to do things in any field. And we should collaborate with an external organization like the Royal Horticultural Society so that they can read the data. So we don't just make our own metadata that's not really movable around. And I said, as far as the VR is concerned, I given the same slideshow I gave you. So I showed the basic things, and I took your animation, Adam, of the card with a little flower and put it in and stuff like that. So there is some idea there. And then he said, oh, asked if I could send the slides. And I said, why don't I just do a video? So that's what I posted in the Twitter. It's what you guys know. So now we'll just wait for them to have their internal discussions and see how the things progress. I did mention, oh, sorry, yes, go on there.
Yeah, one thing I really like about the Linnaean Society data set is that it doesn't start sliding into the political realm. So I think that's a much firmer foundation for us to be working in.
Oh, what do you mean by political realm?
Well, if you start getting into the climate change, then you have anyone who's a climate change skeptic not wanting to deal with us, and anything that basically gets political is such a hot button. At least certainly in the US, where people won't engage in anyone who they think is affiliated with the other side of the spectrum than they're on, whereas staying with the Linnaean Society data is totally neutral. So that problem just goes away and becomes a non-issue.
I'm not sure if I fully agree there, because a climate skeptic is a person I don't want to talk to, first of all. And the people on the political spectrum that tends to be climate skeptics also don't tend to understand the basic notion of evolution. So they would probably have a problem with Linnaeus as well. So,
but I think the underlying point is there, that the point is, you pick any hot button topic, that the fact that Carl Linnaeus sorted out plant and animal taxonomy a while ago is not controversial, and that's a fortunate thing, because we hopefully don't get into the rocky area where somebody feels they don't want to interact with the data because in some way cross a line to them, and that's part of modern life, and so not having that problem is actually a remarkably useful thing.
yeah, we'll see. Talking of politics, I mentioned that we had looked at the Great Library in Egypt, and he said they were also in discussions with them, and they felt that was highly political, and that they may be able to do something, but every other week the political decisions keep changing. So we were wise to leave that one paused.
It's an interesting point you make. The sort of person said, well, what do you get out of VR? Because in a sense, well, that's why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, it's that difficult thing. You have to hold on to the promise of what it might be, whilst accepting that what we have at the moment is sort of not that great.
Yeah.
If you want to take a glass half empty thing, but I think one has to see beyond that. And a number of the things we're treading over are just the lack of mature tools and some limitations in the tech that I'm sure that a year or two of bigger companies coming in and wanting to get going in the platform will shift the needle on.
I'm not so concerned about limitations on the tech, but I did say we don't know what the real promise is, so we need to do that research, because it doesn't look like a lot of others are working on it on this aspect.
I mean,
so that was good.
I mean, a tech thing that I do see as a limit, but I'm happy to be told I'm wrong in a sense, is just the fact that if we want to do textual stuff, at the moment we have this sort of false limit. It's like a current technology limit that we need to have it sort of here, which is not necessarily where we actually, to be readable, which is not actually necessarily where we want it for the other transformations we want to do. And I'm assuming that will, go away, not necessarily overnight. And so that's sort of, again, I may be wrong, but I see that as a transient limit.
I think Adam saw it on Twitter, but I shared a couple of weeks ago. I'm waiting for the test of the Varjo headset from a Finnish company that has a screen inside a screen. I tried it already just before the pandemic, I think 2019. I went to Helsinki just to try it. And it works, and it's better. It's also 5,000 euros plus 1,000 or 2,000 euros license, plus like a 2,000 or 3,000 euros computer. So it is better, and it's probably good enough in terms of resolution for text, even though that, of course, depends on everybody's own preference and eyesight and all that. But it's also like super clunky or super, it's nowhere near like a Quest where you pop in your backpack, try it with a friend at a library or wherever you want. So I think some of those changes either are already there or will be there soon, but maybe for deeper pockets or for rather selected audience. I personally still am excited for trying these things because I believe they give like a little preview of what's coming. So whenever it's possible, I do like it. And also I had a friend who was a VR skeptic a couple of years ago, bought a VR headset rather quickly after, but he was always asking a question that I thought was pretty good, like how is that how is that better than a 4K screen, for example? And usually to me the answer is manipulation or interaction, natural manipulation or interaction. Because if it's just a giant screen or just a video projector, we already have a bunch of high quality options, affordable, movable. So usually to that, it's a legitimate question. Should I just get a 4K screen, even if it's a big one, even if it's a fancy one, or is there something that is qualitatively radically different than just slightly bigger and slightly more compact. So I think that those are good questions that we need to address whenever we communicate, for example, pitching or discussing with somebody who is not familiar, so that, yeah, they don't have to ask us the question, because, yeah, it's going to get asked.
It did come up this morning. Hi, Brandel. I was just updating everyone that I did a presentation to one guy at Google today, similar to what I showed you guys on Friday. And he asked, amongst other things, the question of what does VR really contribute? And I said that the scanning and metadata is really, really important. So if you want to do it in AR, traditional environments, whatever, it doesn't matter. That should still be eminently possible. So now we were just talking about the VR specific thing. And I think what Adam made with the little flower thing on the little card gets somewhere close to answering that, because it's inherently dimensional. Because if we accept that VR for quite a while will not have the resolution of a retina display or paper, you know, I think we all agree that the clear benefit of VR is space, both in terms of this and also in terms of this and the interactions, right? So the more we can think of to demonstrate that in a small thing, even, you know, like we keep saying, the mural, it's a wonderful demonstration of size and basic interaction. Will be very, very useful as we need to bring more and more people on board. The flower on the slip on the card that you did, Adam, to integrate that with the mural, so that anytime you touch anything on the mural and pull it out, that's what you actually get. Is that a large amount of work, for example?
Do you mean in full VR?
Yeah, I'm thinking person comes into VR and all they have is maybe one of the taxonomies. And if they pinch, this is all the direction we give them, pinch to pull on a name, then they get a slip with a flower. Doesn't matter what name, they don't know that. They're all the same for our demo. But you pull that out and instantly that text turns into that card with a flower on top. You know, that just shows it's a magical space, because, you know, it changes, for instance.
Yeah, for me it's some work, but it's mostly because I still have many bugs in my I haven't used Brandel's template or anything. I'm trying to learn it from scratch to set up all the VR cameras and so on. And I usually get lots of bugs and artifacts with that. So it's some work for me, but I think it's not a lot of work for someone who knows what they're doing. Just taking my code and pasting it into something pinchable.
It does seem, taking a point, Fred, about, well, you know, things it can show in terms of VR, that actually if you had something like the card, there are a number of aspects of that thing, that plant, animal, whatever information there, that can be unpacked. So that's quite useful, because effectively it's part of the same issue you've been talking about, that if you take a document from the actual reality world into the virtual world, rather than it just turn up as a document, you might want it to basically know that, you know, oh, I've got a data table inside me, or I've got a picture, or I've got, you know, I can unpack things, not necessarily just as object types. You know, it could be more dedicated. So within a data set like the Linnaean set, where it's probably going to be relatively homogeneous, the sort of the types of things that come out might be different, and they might not so much be, you know, a picture versus a data table, but they might be different, just different aspects that we know are common to most of the slips in the data set.
And this is where Brandel and Fabian will say all kinds of interesting things.
I was just still thinking about what the benefits of virtual reality here are, and I think the main thing for me is like a large surface is good, but it also obliges people to interact with the surface, like this explicit like plane that it's on, and prevents people from being able to interact at a distance. And so interaction at a distance with something that has scale is something that's only possible in virtual reality. And being able to display things in intrinsic 3 dimensions outside of the bounds of whatever display surface you've chosen is useful, because you can have a 40-inch screen, or you could have 3 40-inch screens, and that gets you a long way. But you still, if you ever want something outside of that, you either have to add another screen or make the switch into virtual reality. So yeah, I was just thinking about what in practice helps, because from the perspective of somebody organizing a museum or an archive, having something that is an HMD powered also means that you need 1 device per person versus a display environment that allows multiple people to see it at the same time. And that is a tricky one, because there's utility for other people being able to see it, so that inspectable kind of component is lost for the time being. But headsets are getting cheaper, so that's what I'm thinking about. Nothing particularly revolutionary.
I wonder if down the road, everyone will have a big cave room installed in their house.
It's not the same, Peter. You really need to try a headset, because a picture of the room you're in right now, look at the table in front of you. No matter how many monitors you have, or cave or projections, what's on that table will not be part of it. And so the ability to take an object or a data model, and move your head, and not just see it like you're seeing it now, because you're seeing it 2D static. I can see it really easily by moving my head. It is such a transformative experience. So yeah, that's kind of that. But so we have about a week. I think it may be a bit longer until we need to go to the next stage and show something. And if we could have something really basic in VR, it would be really powerfully useful. I mean, that taxonomy as a mural would be one idea. It might be nice, you get close to a name in handwriting, and then it shows it as an overlay with modern text as you are looking into the whole Bob mural, for instance. Again, we don't have the data. We're not going to translate everything. So no matter where you point, it'll be the same name that pops up. And then we have because you already have that amazing pinching that Brandel did. That's just insane. I mean, it's literally almost nothing in terms of opportunity, but it demonstrates so much. It's just super powerful. So if we can just do something in the 3rd dimension there, it would be really amazing. Yeah, Fabian.
Because you mentioned different demos, I'm wondering if the audience, or the person who will read the proposal or consume it, let's say, will have a headset. Because if they don't, I know it's going to sound vulgar, but stitching together multiple videos showing the different demos, and with the right timing, maybe with a transition, evokes the idea. And if the person is smart enough, they should be able to project what happened if you have multiple demo combining them, because sometimes the blending breaks everything, basically, if you do match and mix demos. So again, if they don't have a headset, a little bit of video editing goes a long way. Obviously, if everything works entirely from the headset, it's even more interesting for us also, for getting the viewer. But that's an option too.
Yeah, I know that the Quest can record horizontal video much better than it could previous update. That's a much better alternative. It's not just square anymore. It's fantastic. But
No,
also,
no, sorry. What I meant, maybe I wasn't explicit. I meant like 2D audio editing on the computer. Like you take.
no, I understand. But
Okay,
a
okay.
little bit of the VR that we have and a little bit of makeup. Yeah, no, I understand. But also for this particular audience, I think everybody will have a VR headset because I'll put it on their head. Because these people are based in London. So if they haven't tried it before, I'll bring one along to all the meetings. And then if it's as simple as on our website, in our VR resources, or maybe somewhere special, here's demo 1, and then they, oh my God, can we do this? Take their headset, take the head off, change the URL, here's number 2. It doesn't have to be seamless. But other than Vint, who's sitting on the other side of the world, who's kind of our, not super supporter, but kind of above these things supporter, everyone else, we will stick a headset on them. Because the act of saying a few of these things in VR, it is, to boring repetition, transformative. It's incredibly hard to explain. Brandel, I still remember the feeling when you started going on about this back in January, when you said the fact that you have all these degrees of freedom, but you move your head instinctively without thinking, which is what recorded VR looks so bad. That's the whole point of why it's so good when you're there. So, I mean, okay, shall we just brainstorm a little bit of ideas of maybe doing VR? Because then the guys here, you guys who know how to make it, can raise your hand up and say, oh, they're ridiculous, or that's actually super simple, because we don't know what that might be, right? So you could imagine if you start with this thing of the taxonomy, point, things change. Drag out, you get a card, because the card is our key thing with a little flower. But when you do that, maybe a pre-rendered globe then appears to the side. And it has an area highlighted that shows where that species is, the habitat of that species. And then you drop it and put it away, the globe goes away. Maybe there's something on the ground, like suddenly you see lots of these things growing on the ground. So it's basically interaction trigger equals, oh, that's all over the place. So if you guys have stuff you've already made, maybe some of it can be, yes, sorry, Brandel.
No, I was just thinking, I haven't made anything to this effect yet, but in terms of if plants have locations, then you can integrate either a map or a globe, or something that continuously varies between a map and a globe based on the spherical curvature of the region that it covers as well. Because if you have a large enough map of Europe, then the curvature of it becomes sort of relevant and a useful picture to be able to kind of see, and having the ability to have a sort of a panel or a view of that map simultaneous to the data of the specific species allows you to kind of order them on that, and that ability to see the curvature of a map is interesting because we only have the ability to represent either 2D projections in the form of things like a Mercator, or 3D renders of 2D like 2D renders of 3D maps and globes, which we're sort of increasingly opting for these days, but it's still not the same as actually seeing the 3D sphere of a world. So yeah, I know you said we won't have the data, but it would be useful for me to have a sense of what is in the data at a broad level, because I'm not sort of familiar with what kinds of things would even be in it if somebody were to go through the business of scanning. So yeah, is there a sort of if it's primarily the cards, like I'd love to know step through what the bits of the cards are and how representative they are of the rest of the data.
The cards are very, very difficult to read, but of course, what we can do is take modern data for the same species. That's a whole question of when you use only Linnaean and when you use modern. Fabian as well.
I wanted to, again, sounds a bit dirty, but the data or the items being hard to read allow us to cheat a bit. Like, yeah, it's about that plant. Okay, it's about that plant. Oh yeah, it's about that geographical coordinate, and then we put a pin in the US, whereas it's in France. Okay. I think as long as we explore the idea, of course, if it's correct and generalizable, it is better. But if only us know and we say, oh, whoops, it's the wrong one, but it still explain how the interaction will be, that's okay. So I think there are acceptable shortcuts in some conditions. And the other thing I wanted to say that is a bit less positive is I think one has to be cautious about metaphors. So for example, the plant and then the grass going out and all this, because it can give an amazing effect, like a wow effect. But then they might also not generalize so well. Of course, we get the idea of adapting the environment, but do we do this also when we talk about chemistry and then it's empty space? Or I'm not sure how. There is some limitation of being literal, is what I'm trying to express.
Well, the thing is, for all of the plants, apparently, they have the original flattened, dried samples. So that's also an alternative, to use that rather than a real plant now. But we could obviously have the issue with the balance of data missing, where we maybe do something generic or do nothing. We could also do the opposite of treating it like it mostly won't be there, but when we do, it could be amazing. Let's say there's a specific monkey, and we have access to a really cool monkey render, maybe even 3D, where that monkey crawls around the card. Right, that could be a real extra positive, oh, how cool is that moment? And then there's an elephant, and it's just a static elephant. Clearly an issue, though. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, just quickly in thinking to sort of actually Fabienne's point about sort of things quite literal, just a thought as a sort of slight provocation is that, okay, well, something perhaps I might come to, if I come to look at a card about, say, some plant, I might wonder actually, well, is this genus, how many species are there in the genus? Are they, by looking at a map, could I see them on a map? So are they geographically disparate, or do they grow in different ecosystems in the same area? So you suddenly start to think, oh, I might want to see the distribution of 2 species on the same map, because I might want to see what they are. I might want to find out if there's a herbarium where I can view this something, or whether I can view a living specimen in a garden or arboreum, or I might want to go to, say, a seed bank. I might be interested in studying the seed. I mean, and you can draw the same sort of analogies for animals in this sense, but I'm sort of trying to think of things that you might do that are less about a sort of museum experience, like, isn't this wow, as to being able to actually interact with the data to get something meaningful out to somebody who has some understanding of what the data is. It's a slightly different use case, but it might go some way towards helping with the point Fabienne raised.
I think, Mark, we need to do that, definitely, no question, but I think that's a design towards the actual thing. And if you guys can write this down, even if it's just bullet points, that kind of stuff, that would be very useful. I also see Peter's comment. I think first analytical step to identify the dimensions and domains of the material and the data set. I think that's going to be really, really important once we start talking to these people about what's in the data sets, and to understand that, that'll be crucial. But right now, we are quite literally trying to sell and understand why in the world we are. So that's why we're looking at these kinds of rich interactions. If it turns out that the interactions actually don't make sense later on, I don't have a problem with that, because that means we learned that and we document it. Fabienne?
Yeah, because you mentioned like finding a monkey model, whatnot. So I don't know how people are familiar or not with 3D models and the web and VR, but so that's $20. And I'm sure it's not, how do you say, correct from a plant perspective, scientific perspective, but it's $20. And you have a dozen or so. And this lady, this artist, have been 5 or 20 of them. So I think another way is to start from those and backtrack to see what is the closest card related to it, and then let people imagine, like, if there was more time of resources, once that cool interaction or way to do it is done, they can imagine. But that's this website Sketchfab is pretty good, has a large resources, very usable, plenty of artists, and it took me like 2 minutes while we had the discussion to look for those. I think most of the demo that I know that I do, but I think for Brandon and Adam is the same, is showing the core concept, and then everything then after in terms of visual customization. You can imagine like a box being replaced by any of those beautiful assets. We usually don't go that far because, yeah, the core idea has been expressed, but in practice, once that idea has been expressed, to replace by that and to find close enough from library of assets it is usually the easy part, I would say.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Raphael, do you want to show the book again? You were tiny when you showed it originally.
It's Margaret Mee. She's one of the most famous botanical illustrators, and she lived in Brazil for a long time. And these are all watercolor paintings of flowers, which I recommend.
Yeah, no, that's nice. But guys, I think at this point, we should be maybe more in the dreaming and not actually trying to be too helpful track, because I think once Isabel is back, a lot of what we have thought of, she will say is rubbish anyway. But you know, she knows the use cases. I think we can basically, you know, make it very, very clear. We're not trying to ram anything down her throat by doing some of these presentations. It's purely to stimulate dialogue. But you know, when I go to the Linnean and bring the Oculus, put it on her head in a week or so, you know, you know, her balance between what can this do versus what is too much. She clearly wouldn't want a Disney World or a, you know, something fakery. But what else can be amazing?
Yeah. So what I was saying about the multiple screens, a big benefit is the ability to have a large amount of coordinated stuff happening. So, you know, if you have 3 large screens, you can show 3 large screens worth of information, but you don't have necessarily the ability to coordinate all of that stuff at once. And so if you're looking at one particular plant, then you sort of have to end up being duplicative of this content on this screen, that content, the same content on that screen, to allow people to have multiple, to get more people in a space. But if you can have all of those things kind of sing from the same sheet in terms of, we're talking about this particular plant and its prevalence is here, and its sort of taxonomic similarity to other plants is here, and sort of samples of it in the wild are here. You can show enough stuff to entertain as effectively a lot of people, while being able to have those things coordinated. And so that's easier when it's all on the same machine. It's easier when it's arguably easier when it's in virtual reality. And you know, you could possibly have people not share experiences if you like it that way. But yeah, so having those different views and facets of what it is that is present in Linnaeus's slips could be a useful thing to look at. So, like I said, where they are. Oh, there's another thing that I was thinking about when people were talking about taxonomy. Apple said Apple doesn't publish an organization chart, but what you can find is who somebody's boss is and who their reports are. And so somebody built an app internally called org that when you put in a name and then you put in another name, it walks the tree until it finds their common relationship, because everybody reports to Tim Cook. And so you can see the entire kind of structure, but just reduced down to the specific change of reporting that reflects all of the people in a given meeting. And so, yeah, you could do that with common ancestors of plants, and to be able to see how they sort of relate to each other, or other sort of relative things. If you're looking at a couple of different specimens, and that goes somewhere toward being a tool for research and investigation as well as a demo.
Yeah, that's important. And there's a really key thing here of data portability that we need to look at once we get further with this, I think. Because the kind of queries we talked about earlier, we should be able to, in this environment, look something up in Wikipedia too, if we absolutely insist on that thing. Should be able to go across domains. And I think a really important dream here is you are in a completely different VR environment and you come across a plant or an animal. You should be able to have the interaction of holding that and choosing view in the Linnean thinking room. And it takes you there. And then you may even be surrounded by that library, which is beautiful. You do all these interactions. When you're done, you go back to where you were. So when you talked about charts and orgs and connections, that just became kind of important. But yeah, sorry, Fabian and then Mark.
Just a quick remark, because we mentioned the number of screens quite often, and I'm going probably to shock people here. I have one screen. I don't have 2 or 3 screens. And my logic behind it is simply ergonomy. Like, I don't want to spend my time like this, half twisted. And if I'm half twisted because I have a good chair and my hands are twisted, and so when I see movies about hackers and 5 screens and whatnot, my neck hurts. So I get that we all want more space and higher resolution and connecting things together. But in practice, I'm not saying it's better, but I'm doing the effort actually of having less screen so that my screen is in front of my eyes and in front of my neck. And if it means I need to arrange my windows or spaces differently, I try to do this. So I think the panacea of having multiple screens might work when we are, for example, standing up and acting with them and interacting with them, or just forgetting the screen to have an actual space. But it's just a little bit of provocation to say more screen potentially, but only in the right ergonomical context. Otherwise, I would criticize that a bit.
I agree, and I feel the same. Mark?
Yeah, and I might add, in fact, that the fact that I actually have a couple of screens isn't really out of any dogma. It's more that the majority of my work actually involves working on one thing whilst looking at another. And that is actually quite difficult on one screen because you just can't see enough. But it doesn't mean that I actually want 2 enormous screens or 16 screens. Actually, 2 reasonable does it for me. But it's an edge case, and it's not something everybody needs, to be perfectly honest. So I take Fabian's point entirely. What I was just going to say was another thought was the fact that, well, okay, what do we go to the Linnean Society for? I mean, yes, in terms of demo, we can go and see renders of plants and animals and things, but I mean, we could also go to the zoo, or we could go to Kew Gardens or something where we could actually see the thing growing. So I mean, do people go to the Linnean Society to see a picture of a monkey? Not necessarily. And I'm still trying to think, well, yes, what's in there that we could posit that people might want to see? So, for instance, the evolution of the taxonomic system might be something that could be visualized in the sense of, well, how does this pull apart from that, or how many versions of this did he go through before he got the general gist of it? And those are things that will be there in the overall data, and which I imagine speak more closely to Linnaeus's work than, in a sense, aesthetically pleasing looking pictures that are less innately related to the data. But I didn't have any firm views, just began throwing an idea out there.
Well, Mark, I see Peter has his hand up, but just really briefly, once we talk to them, we will better understand what the data is and their use cases. I think right now it's really just selling them on the notion that, oh, this is quite cool. And yeah, I mean, why would you want to see the animal? You go to the zoo, you're absolutely right. But it would just help you identify this bizarre name that's really the purple plant that you thought about or something.
Sure. Well, what I mean by that then, so what might be more interesting to someone than and is something that's quite hard to do. So instead of having to get 10 slips out and arrange them on a big table, then essentially we could simulate in the first sense your ability to actually find that information and draw it together, without having to walk around.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But one of the magical things about VR is, the fact that 3D is 3D natural. You don't have to click a button to twist it, right? So that's why the card that Adam did with a flower on it, even though it's mostly useless, it helps sell the idea that actual 3D things have value. That's it at this stage. It may turn out that we're going to do something much more plain and utilitarian in reality. Absolutely. This is just a inspire, but not inspire from a sales, like we're doing an ad for them and we should have lots of loud things, not at all, but just the possibility of that stuff. Peter.
Sure, agree. I mean, that all makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, I think it would be good for us to take a look at numerical taxonomy and cladistics. Those are two areas. One, looking at the actual evolutionary relationships of species, and the other dimension is comparing their functional features. So you can cluster them based on their actual genetic relationships, or you can cluster them based upon characteristics. So you might have two genetically unrelated things that have co-evolved to have similar physical forms, and it would be nice if we could get at that. And again, I commend everyone to take a look at Cyberspace First Steps for that section talking about unfolding spaces and the idea of having the position in three-dimensional space serve as a query cursor into a hyperdimensional data set that you can then open up. So again, instead of plotting the locations in the space, the points in the space correspond to the queries that get applied to the data set instead. And that's a very interesting approach, and I haven't seen that implemented anywhere. Right now, I'm like buried in heavy tooling. I'm yak shaving, working on first giving Tinderbox an autosave capability, then using Tinderbox with the autosave capability for authoring literate programs so that I can use the literate programming tool to recast and organize all of my user interface widgets in IMBA, which I will then be using to implement the 3D models using Babylon.js. But I'm like a couple of layers deep in tooling at the moment, so it'll be a while before I'm able to come up with demos again. But once I do, I'll be in a better place to have explainable demos where not only will the demo work, but the source code will be a literate program exactly explaining how and why it's behaving the way it does, so that other people can hopefully start leveraging those affordances to build out other demos, as opposed to just having a code base that only I can understand and no one else can work with. So that's my agenda for the short term.
Thank you. Fabian, are you so polite you're going to wait?
Of course I am. So a couple of things. I'm wondering if any of us either role-playing the audience or if we're going to find somebody who would do the action of the audience or do the needs or have some kind of playing with it before. I'm saying this because usually when like some friends naive enough asking me for advice, like, oh, should I take this job or do this? My initial reaction is always, well, do you know somebody who has this job? Did you chat with them to see if it was good or makes sense, or for you it's adapted? So I'm wondering, is it Mark, or is Mark now our pre-client, let's say, by doing some tinkering with those cards? And if not, can we find somebody, even if it's just for like an informal half-an-hour chat? It's like, oh, does a botanist do this, or is it not a botanist but a biologist, and do they need this kind of information? I might be interesting to find that. If you're talking, I can't hear you. Okay.
The Linnaean Society, they will, we'll hopefully have a meeting together where with Isabel, where she will join us like this, and she will go through that, and she will help us find the categories of users because there'll surely be normal young students and academics plus others, and they will have specific needs. So I'm very, very keen on doing this step by step. We have to be very careful and do exactly what you're saying. But I think the step right now is headset goes on, a thing from this is shown, and action can happen, unlocking the idea of VR.
So for the actions, I wrote down a couple of ideas, again, naively, because I didn't have the chat with the audience or user or client or whomever. So we see one plant, for example, that has Saddam put it on top of the card. And again, I'm not Darwin or biologist, but from my shallow understanding of these processes, they went through a bunch of comparison, meaning we see a lot of plants or animal or entity from a certain geographical area, and we see others, and they somehow are related but not related. So basically, visual comparison. And when I look at books from botanists, as said before, a bunch of beautiful drawings, but I don't think the drawings are beautiful to be beautiful, but just to have some point of comparison, which means to me that that will make a diff between two 3D models, so not just one, but a second one. We superimpose them just by bringing them together. They either snap in place to find the maximum overlap, and then highlight a zone that is not the same. And then if we do this, it's like the diff that we put into a tree, like a phylogenetic tree, and we can put the card associated to the two cards to the two plants next to each other and start to make some kind of structure. That's really talking of my, I don't know if that's any relevance to how it was historically done, but it sounds like methodologically speaking, it might make sense.
I think that's crazy and useful. And I can imagine, you know, if you look at caricature, it's take a model head, take some unique individual and then extend it till it goes too far, right? So we could compare two species and say, what would a species in between this be? But if you take that and it grew into this, what would it evolve if it just goes in the same direction? That kind of stuff would be, oh yeah, there we go, latent space. Yeah, lots of these amazing things absolutely can be thought about. But something simple. I mean, most theatrical would probably be, you put the headset on, there's a table in front of you, there's the stack of cards. You know, maybe they're spread out, whatever, but it's really, really simple. Yeah, Mark?
I was just thinking, so in terms of that theatricality, it's a way of quickly sort of in a sense exploding one pile of cards into a number of different axes, for want of the information. There might be the relationships, it might be the time, you know, a temporal axis here when they were first discovered, or it might relate into the family groupings they're in, which is all quite close to the subject matter. I was thinking of Fabienne's point, and I had a slightly different thought in terms of the differing of things. Is one of the ways, certainly in my recollection of, you know, when you're doing field identification of things, is you're normally looking at external structures. I mean, it's easier with plants because they can't run away. But you're often looking at very small bits. You know, does it have 6 petals or does it have 5? Because they hint an underlying structure, and then you get the difficult things that decide that they actually have 6 petals. They just don't grow them, and, you know, so you have to look really hard to find the trace of them. But that's one interesting way that you could put a visual element to it. You can say, look, here are a group of related things. Their form and structure is actually quite different. So, you know, these are the same things, and that's just as true in the animal kingdom. You know, there are all these things. You know, you think of all the different shapes and ways that animals behave, and yet they're all reasonably closely related. I mean, they're more closely related to one another than they are to a fungus. So there might be something to pull out there.
I think we're in a stage of being a bit too intelligent next stage, because if that's the kind of stuff that they agree with, and I think it sounds eminently brilliant to be able to do comparisons, relationship, all of that good stuff. Absolutely, for different ways, and, you know, then how to store the results. It would, of course, be great if a student can come in, do things in the space, and somehow take the resulting data out so they can include it in a school or university paper. so this becomes citable, absolutely. And, looking at which other databases they believe should be interactable. But if we just look at what we have and we just look at, let's say we have a week or two to do a cool thing. All right, you come into a room, there's a stack of cards, or there's a taxonomy in front of you, or there's a book. Imagine something as silly as there's a stack of cards on the table, and the only instruction we give to the user is, lift one card. And then it does the kind of stuff you talked about earlier. It grows the taxonomy from that card in space, just like the cards magically go into that, right? That could be interesting. Or you tell them to rock the table and the cards fall to the floor, physics-based, but they don't fall randomly to the floor. Right, this is just about jogging theirs and our imagination that these are physical things, but in a non-physical space, how much fun can we have? It has to be fun, right? Or we start with a plant. There's a plant on the table, nothing else. And they touch that, they grab that plant, lift that plant, and suddenly the card comes hanging under it. And they can now choose to interact with the card. And maybe there's metadata around the card saying this is also found in this taxonomy. You tap on that and you get the taxonomy in a mural. Just a few actions like that, literally 3-minute demo. Yeah, Mark?
I quite like the last idea simply because, I mean, the cards are interesting artifacts. Most of us probably would struggle to read them fully through without close instruction. So they're interesting artifacts, but it's not as if, if you held one in front of you, you'd immediately sort of scan through it and know what it is. So taking this route of saying something that's sort of, there's an animal or there's a plant, and you attach to that, and then you find, and that leads you then back to the information as a discovery sort of mechanism for a lay audience. I think that's a nice sort of introduction, because otherwise you start with, a pack of cards, that's exciting, and unless you play lots of board games, it may not be exciting. So that might be an interesting interaction, because part of what one, as well as exploring the sort of VR aspect of it, part of the initial thing is to sort of say, why do I want to interact more with this thing? I know it's a historical artifact, I know it's interesting and precious and rare, but there's a card, look, there's another card with the same handwriting on it, and there's a big stack of them. So it does, your excitement doesn't scale just by looking at more cards, if you see what I mean. So the sense that you just described, that, well, if I sort of pick up this flower or this animal or something, and there's a card, and I begin to understand, if I didn't before, that our knowledge of what this thing I'm holding is derived from the information that somebody wrote down there. That's quite a nice, interesting conduit of engagement, I think.
Raphael? Who's found his headset?
Hello, I found my headset on my hand. So I remember that I took some notes a couple weeks ago on VR, and I keep jumping back and forth because I was traveling. I was dealing with some things for my my dad that passed away. So now I'm back in the studio and I'm back in my notes. So the notes that I took was less based on what a user can do and more based on what a user can experience. And this means something along the lines of a guided walkthrough in an immersive environment. So once they put the headset on, they don't have to do anything, they don't have to touch anything. But something important would be a narrator that would take the person through this environment, whatever it may be. So in this case, in the Linnaean Society, would be plants, natural histories, things along those lines. But I imagine something along the lines of a BBC documentary, but immersive. And that's something that could be done easily enough because you can control at least the narrow view. I'm thinking at least 180 degrees forward. So the person doesn't have to do any kind of big movements or something like that. And they would be immersed in that environment. So if it's plants, then we would have a plant background, and then things would come up close automatically. They could see it. Maybe they could move a little bit here and there. But I was thinking of limiting the user input to give user a better immersive experience. I feel like that would be a nice first step towards immersive content. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, fair point. But being able to do a few interactions like that magical scaling of a mural really does help give a feeling, but the background and yeah. Fabian?
Just a quick compliment, sorry. I'm thinking of this in a point of view of a museum where you go to see a painting. So you would just go up to a place in the room, you would put the goggles on, and you would stay there for the period of the movie. So maybe like 5 minutes, 10 minutes for the whole interaction. And then you take the goggles off and you're done, you go to another part of the museum. Because if we have things related to movement, then we automatically need to have somebody there to explain the interactions that are possible within that environment. I'm thinking of any sorts of people that end up. So putting our goggles on is very easy. Putting our goggles on and handling two moving objects, that's a little bit more difficult. So I'm trying to bring down the difficulty level to increase people's immersiveness in the environment.
We definitely have to keep that down, and there is and the whole recorded is not a bad idea at all. We definitely want to do. I mean, one of the key things we've discussed is to give as the final product, it's a book. But in the book you can choose which curated view you want, and also which guided tour you want. So there would be official Linnaean one and so on. But some of these interactions are very simple, and I'll say it for the billionth time because I'm so impressed. Just the ability to do that, to scale an entire mural, it does something to your brain when you realize you can do that. That's just absolutely. So we do need a few interactions, but if it starts being like this and then you hold your fingers like that, which some of the Oculus things want, yes, that's ridiculous. Some balance. Yeah, Fabian. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll briefly share my screen in terms of the visit or the tour rather. So I've done that a couple of times, and we were like half a dozen, like 6 person, I don't remember. Some of them were in VR, some of them were just on desktop, and I designed a little world like this. Maybe I was on my webcam and then I joined them in VR, to be honest, I can't recall. And then we just hiked up a little mountain that it took me a couple of hours to design with some of the artifacts around, like here, some UNICEF poster, Parliament, some research stuff. And then we gradually went from the most basic, let's say going up a mountain, to something more abstract. So we are literally in the sky flying to try to detach from the literal hike around to something that normally you can't do. You can't actually walk in the sky, and then you can't have like Santa Claus or crazy cat or whatnot. So it was really, there was no special interaction there, just with a hand pointing at stuff, talking to people. But we did have a kind of virtual hike that was quite fun. People did enjoy it. I don't know if it generated any eureka moment for them. And that was relatively easy to set up. It's mostly curating and positioning objects in space. It's not hard technical work, I would say. So doing a hike or a tour, a visit like this, really, it's nice and it's not too much effort. And it's not also exclusive. You can finish the hike like this, can also be as short as a couple of minutes. but to onboard them in the process. Like for example, here, well, we don't see, but some of the visuals are about the framework used to make the world around them. So you can say, okay, this is done using that framework, using this in your headset, you have some 3D model, and they look and they're in the world as it's been built. So yeah, that works quite well because it's immersive, and yet you can break the curtain to say this is how it was done. Why do I mention it? It's because beyond the actual visit, then people start to think, okay, but how can we make such a visit? How does it apply to my case? So you have like an in situ demonstration or presentation, but really guided, again, like a high-core tour, which is a format that is very familiar in museums and public places.
I particularly like the curtains, what's behind the curtains thing. Gonna now, just not all of you were here last time. So here's an idea of the user opening what looks like a normal book. And you have these strips, one, people, timeline, animals, whatever, even on a table. So when you do interactions, you have other items that can appear. Maybe it isn't a book, maybe you open a book and it instantly becomes a huge mural with different sections. This is all about curated experiences. So this does very much agree with what you were talking about, Raphael, about having some sort of a guide, but it can be completely guided or not guided. But this is for the future reality down the line. But when we're looking at kind of inspirational moments, we can do things like this. But also, if you look at the item as, the slip has touched something and something else comes out, this is literally one of the taxonomies, because there's been a little bit of abstraction in the discussion here. So guys, wouldn't it be amazing if you just pinch a name and something comes out and it's this? Is that not impressive? The original card for whatever that thing was behind there comes out with a doodah on top, a flower or whatever. I just think that it could be so, it's that idea of when something is static, when it's touched and when it's moving, and when it's placed somewhere, it can have completely different instantiations, even though it's the same data.
The cards are two-sided, aren't they? Are they only written on one side? Or
they are two-sided, but the back is usually another card. If there's an X because it's been put in his book, then he will use the back of it. So one thing we could do is have, like English or typeset language on one side and the original on another.
mm-hmm.
Raphael, you're saying botanical slips are the foundation of index cards are nice XD. What do you mean XD in this context?
It's an emoji. It's
an emoji.
No.
It's
Culture
eyes and a
gap
big
there.
open
I'm sorry.
smiley face.
I keep thinking about text in VR, and I still cannot seem to grasp. Maybe I have to put goggles on, but I still can't seem to jump between titles and body text. For me, VR is more about labels and titles and less about reading. It's more about listening, less about reading. Because if you're, for example, if I read a book, I get immersed as I read. If I have goggles on, I get immersed based on other experiences. It could be sound, it could be music, it could be a narration, it could be an environment. But I don't think text as like a large block of text being read in VR, it tends to pull me from VR rather than pull me in. It tends to pull me out.
You do need to put the goggles on your head, because there are many different experiences depending on what kind of brain you have. For me, my level of being on the autistic spectrum is that I can't filter out things happening here. I have way high sensitivity. So if I need to focus, I literally appreciate the limited field of view so I can focus on something that's in front of me. And of course, we're talking about fidelity of the display. You know, that's going to change as you said, with iterations better and better and better. But I think what the group do agree with is two of the key things in VR is size of display, basically everything, and interactions. Right, those are really, really key things, and we're trying to emphasize those. There's also something we need to discuss at some point, which is the difference between the foreground object and the background space and how they interact. Because you can only focus on, of course, one or two things at the same time. So where you put your focus is a really important thing. But in terms of just data, is the room and the background the same thing? I would prefer it to be separable so that I can look at this card or this toy or whatever it might be anywhere I want. But then I may want the space to come in. So when it comes to some of the realities, it becomes interesting like that.
Another point I had written that I just read is related to the interactions. And I'm thinking of a combination between where I'm looking and one button. Imagine I only have one button to press and that's all the interaction I have. But as I move my head, if I'm looking at a Rubik's Cube, then the Rubik's Cube kind of pops and it gets a little bit bigger because the focus is on the Rubik's Cube. And then if I press one button, then the Rubik's Cube comes up close. I don't have to pinch or drag or anything like that. It's a one button interaction that brings objects close or far away. And that seems like a simple interaction to have.
Raphael, no, I'll have to tell you why. This was a big surprise for me too. The hand tracking with the Oculus is absolutely phenomenal, out of this world, incredible. There are limitations, like if it's on the side, it can't see you. But to be able to pinch something is really easy, and it gives you a sense of presence. And this magical thing with the mural, you know, you pinch and the whole mural goes like that. It is so simple. If you press a button, you know, you don't really know what the button will do. But if you can pinch something and do that, it goes bang, bang. So there are a few interactions that we can tell the user, you know, welcome to our little test experience. Here's the thing. All you can do is pinch and move about, pinch and lift. It's super simple, super natural, and it really feeds into some of the naturalness. I mean, even just talking, you know, our hands are moving about like this. But I'm afraid I have to start driving back down to London. I can try to join the call again from the car, but today is not a brilliant day for many reasons, as Mark has mentioned elsewhere. Do we have any more, for now, kind of final thoughts about what we may actually want to put on, let's say, Isabel's head? Isabel at the Linnean Society?
Yeah, well, so one thing that I was thinking about is the fact that we have the ability to look across an entire continuum, but the Linnean Society's collection of slips and pressed flowers and other things represents an artifact about plants which is related to but distinct from the plants themselves. And so information about the plants is useful, but also information about the slips and about Linnaeus and about the process are valuable sort of areas and avenues of investigation. And it's worth being aware of those things as being distinct in order to make sure that that we don't sort of trample one for the sake of the other, and understand that there are multiple ways to get around it. The stuff that's more specifically about Linnaeus maybe has a more specific relevance to that society, although everything was discovered by somebody. Whereas the sort of the things that are about contemporary investigation of the subject per se, as it has evolved from there, are potentially more relevant to students, but have potentially less of a value proposition for the Linnean Society itself. So looking at ideas and actually using that as a lens to assess things across that continuum is, I think, a valuable line of investigation as well, to go like, well, if this is about the subject matter, then what does it look like? Versus if this is about the specific artifacts that are under lock and key in the society, what do we do with them there? And so, yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach to be able to take, to think about all of the different options, the ways that they would appeal to different stakeholders as well.
Just want to say, that's what I look at the areas of extensions. I think it's really important you put it in that way to really highlight it. It's super important. We should be able to do a freestanding information silo only about Linnaeus and the collection, absolutely. And then we should also look at how to make it explicitly clear to connect that into external data. We need both. They should not be overlapping. Or sorry, they should bleed together.
One big piece of homework I would love. So if nobody's seen a video about Chalk Talk, then please do watch one. It's this brainchild of Ken Perlin. Barbara Tversky mentioned it. I was pleased to note that she's actually been on board with trying to get funding for it. Fabienne's mentioned that it's more difficult to get set up and running than you would hope, and so it's less about the specific thing and more about this as having the capacity to be able to kind of interactively perform in the same way that a really good lecturer has a blackboard or a whiteboard. Perlin has a 3D board effectively that is able to make semantically relevant and run kind of simulations and things. And it's basically Khan Academy, but hopefully a little better. And I think that's a really great model or template for what kinds of things a guided tour could be, and the ways in which 3D, intrinsic 3D could intervene on that as a sort of a pedagogical opportunity. So yeah, really, really cool. Chalk Talk.
Yeah, absolutely worth watching. Completely agree. Peter?
Do we know what dates the individual cards were entered into the collection? It'd be very interesting if you could do like a temporal animation showing, say, a globe and what parts of the world cards were being entered from over what periods of time, or to be able to see how maybe for a while he was focused on coniferous plants and you could see all these coniferous cards coming in with very few deciduous entries. And in another period of time when there might be more, or maybe there might just be periods where there's a sudden gap in any collection. And then you could look into the history and find out, maybe they were shut down during wartime for a certain period, and that could lead to insights.
We know a little bit about that. Most of them, from the brief introduction I've had, were not dated. However, some of them were a little bit. And what you can do, you can look at how the cards were cut, because they were cut from larger sheets and they had watermarks. So if you do some analysis, you can say that, okay, this we know was dated this. So all these other ones were certainly not made before, because that's when he got the card. So it's very fuzzy and very interesting. So yeah, we should look at that. But I think for now, we need to look at, pretend there's data, what's feasible to put on someone's head, because Isabel is the first person we have to convince. She's kind of convinced. But I mean, if all I have is a mural, and ideally the taxonomy mural rather than Bob's mural, I think that'll be incredibly valuable. And then we try not to tell her too much about the specific interaction, so that she really feels rightly and necessarily that she's the one telling us to begin with what really has to be possible to view. Because I'm a bit worried about Google and us coming into this tiny group saying, we can do this, we can do that. A little bit of, hold on, let me tell you what I want first. Because I know I can be a bit bulldozing like that for sure.
Do you have a high, what is the highest resolution version of this Linnaean taxonomy mural that we have our access to? I'd love that, because the biggest thing I can see is 1200 pixels online. And it would be good to have a lot more.
I don't have any access beyond what you can find on Google. However, I do have one of those really good, I'm just trying to see it. Somewhere I have one of those make things bigger resolutions. What's it called? One of those pieces of software that's advertised everywhere. And it really works, especially for text. So if you send me the link, I can process that at least.
You mean an up, is that up sampling? Is that what you...
Yeah, but what's the really good one? I don't know if it's even on this laptop. I may have to re-download it.
I mean, the images the two
Actually,
images,
yeah,
the ones you shared with us, I see them as being 5,700 by 3,800.
Yeah, no, I meant the specific. Linnaeus Regnum Animale, possibly, or
Sorry, yeah, his overall, his big diagram.
right. Yeah, I think Frodo was suggesting we put that into the pinch move stuff.
Yeah.
And so getting one that's big enough to be worth doing that with would be just a really good start.
Yeah. Super zoom. I'm in Photoshop now. Let's see if they can do it. What?
Well, the 2K one is getting close enough to in scale that one could actually type over it as well, and that's the 1200 is not quite big enough, but yeah.
Honestly, that's a good problem to have, because if we show somebody interested something that is interesting but not in good quality enough, and we can blame it on them, they kind of have to come back for something better.
Yes.
Yes, good point. Good point. Cool. No, this actually is decent. I think I'll put this into Illustrator. Take a look at it.
Okay, I've run it through a little thing. Oh, well, that was useless. Oh, did a great job, but it didn't. Let me try that again. I think there's another hand up. Let me, because I'm in Photoshop now. Yeah, Peter, and I have to run in a minute, but please.
Okay, I just wanted to note that I put a couple papers in the sidebar, do some visualizations that might be relevant, and some talk about taxonomies and visualizations of natural history kinds of data sets. So a couple things in there to have a look at.
Thank you.
Yeah. 360 camera next time. What are you talking about, Adam?
Bring the camera on your
To the Linnaeus Society.
yeah, have a funny hat on you with the camera inside, and you just lift the hat, take a picture, and put the hat on when she looks away. So you have a good.
I will most definitely ask her for permission to take a 360 image for us to experiment with. I think that's going to be really, really important.
But I think for doing something minimal, working with a familiar and going to the unfamiliar is a good way for introducing VR. I think Hello XR that Mozilla did with one basic room, and then experiences that you go out in portals to do this crazy stuff, and then you come back to a very physical room is a good way of approaching it. And I think in our use case, having a desk with cards and pressed flowers, lifting them and getting the expanded view, some of them on real objects like a old school globe, but also lifted we talked about growing to a tree of lives, things that are more abstract. They can be further away and come in on interaction, but not immediately. I think that could be a way to approach this, to show a bit of both. I don't think it's good to go too far into the desk metaphor. To pretend that this is real life with a few lines, but to add a bit more of the imaginative of the VR. Over.
Hang on, I'm just thinking. Okay, I've made it a bigger taxonomy image. I'm just going to put it on a Dropbox. It may or may not be worth it, but.
And then I think one example that works well with the desk, I believe I mentioned it once or twice, is like infinite drawers, where you start with a normal looking desk, you do a couple of manipulation, then you pull a drawer, and that drawer is not just like a meter, but like 10 or 50 meters or something like this, would fold on itself so that it becomes the wall. Things like, enough to start the interaction in a natural way, but then it's like superpower kind of outcome.
So the infinite desk is a nice metaphor. We all wish we had one, where we could put all our projects in one place and just walk to the next one, or not. So having that, actually a scrollable desk that is very long, but it looks real everywhere, could be a way of approaching it.
the ultimate power desk with a tiny chair very far away for the
Yeah,
other
of
person.
course that's a kind of a mural, but if it looks woody and it's a bridging that familiar and it's a fun way of approaching it.
Mobius desk, yes. You know what? I'm going to put myself on mute and stop video for a bit while I see what's happening with the family, because you guys are much too much on a roll. So please have plenty of entertainment among yourself for a few minutes, if that's okay.
Sure.
So what's your thought? If doing something minimal, should it be that kind of a practical anchor, the desk card thing to start out to have as an anchor point, or should it be more floating in space and being a bit more out there from the start?
To be honest, if it's the first time of somebody in VR, sitting on a chair with a desk or something they're very comfortable with, in my opinion, is safer. Because I gave a demo to somebody, it was the first time in VR, and they were standing up, and I didn't think it was a big deal. And it was, because after a couple of minutes, they had to stop and they even laid down on the floor like this to kind of recover. So I'm not saying it's a general case, but it's definitely safer to have something sitting, ideally with a rotating chair, so that they can still look around freely, but that they really feel safe. So again, because the audience is somebody who is not yet convinced by VR, might see the potential, having a desk is probably not just conceptually, but also in terms of practical demo for Fred, is probably safer. And as you said, yeah, from this we open up to crazier ways. But I would suggest desk.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the other aspect of it is that anchoring it to sort of the primary Linnaean like media is very useful, so that they have a way to identify with